Hello there. I've decided to do some videos about the old world. I'm not going to stop with the Legions Imperialis ones, despite the long gap. But here's another series to go alongside First Fire Orders. This is going to be called Impact Hits. And today I'm going to talk about the special rules, the old world. In all the hype for this game so far, there has been a lot of positivity, but there's also been some negativity, and that unfortunately is what often gets the most attention. Now, apart from the main complaint, which is about the legacy armies, the other thing that I've seen people worrying about is the news that there's 75 special rules in this game. Now, having looked through these, I'm not worried. And I'm inspired to talk about each of them, to see what they'll add, what elements might make life a little bit tricky. But mainly I'll be trying to look at them with a positive slant and thinking about how they streamline the game, or how they simplify it in some way, or perhaps if they add a new strategic element to the game that otherwise would be lacking. Hopefully, we'll be able to conclude that there is not too much extra mental load. Hopefully, there might even be less mental load than if they weren't all there as special rules. And if there are, that it's justified. If I see the negatives, I'll fess up. But let's try and look on the bright side. First up is Ambushes, and it lets you bring in a unit from a table edge of your choice on a dice roll of a 4+ from turn 2 onwards. They'll arrive unable to charge, but they will be an immediate threat to your enemy. I've only seen the Ravening Horde's army lists, but it seems clear that not all armies are even going to get access to this rule. It's an absolutely great rule for the Tomb Kings, though. The Leech Priests in that army get a modified version of Ambush called From Beneath the Sands, and it lets you bring units in from reserves in a way vaguely resembling Deep Strike, in the vicinity of that priest only. And sadly, you can't charge that turn. But you can set up some amazing opportunities for flank charges if you do it right. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be something which is going to catch out opponents at least the first few times you do it. Similarly, Beastmen get a big advantage from this and are able to bring in some really powerful units, including Minotaurs and even some of their HQs. And they get a reroll to make it more reliable when they do. On the other hand, Greenskins and Chaos Warriors don't get to do it at all, but it's clear the impact on gameplay is going to be really huge. There was already similar mechanics in at least some armies, noticeably Beastmen, in previous iterations of the game, and it's not uncommon in other GW games, so I don't think this is a difficult one to implement. It's not going to add significant amounts to mental load, so I think this is a definite hit. Next up is Armor Bane, and if you roll a 6 to wound, the weapon's AP improves by the amount in brackets. I'm not sure this will add much to the game, and from what I've seen, they mostly put it on more elite units who already have some AP, whereas I actually think it would have been better suited to giving weaker units some hope of penetrating armor without making them so good with such high AP that you have to boost their points more than you really want to. They've done it in a few places, such as Goblin Nasty Skulkers and Snotling Pump Wagons, and I think that's where it's perfect. And also on Orc Biggins, which I think is a nice way to boost that unit as a unit upgrade like it is now. But you'll have to remember it when you're already in the middle of combat. It's going to add mental load. You're going to forget it sometimes and then be annoyed when you do. It's not the end of the world. We have very similar things in games like the Horus Heresy, so I think it's okay. It's a hassle, but not so much. But I think they've missed the target on who to give it to, so I am actually going to, stick my neck out and say I don't think this is a good rule the way it's been used in the army lists. Armoured Hide X improves your armor save by the value in brackets, which would have been explained on a unit-by-unit basis in previous editions, the way it was for Lizardmen, for example. So it definitely doesn't increase the complexity of the game. In fact, it's an important feature for some armies, and now it's more accessible for everyone to see how these rules work, and it can be more consistent across the armies. To me, that's an easy win. Breath weapons were already in, I think, all previous versions of the game, certainly back as far as 3rd edition, without being called a special rule. Just it came up in the bestiary, mostly under dragons, even though it wasn't only dragons that used it. So it's already less complex by being in one easily found location. I think most people consider this an essential part of playing Warhammer Fantasy, so I think it had to be in there. It's got to be a win. And on a side note, breath weapons now can't be used when the creature is in combat, and it can't be used as a charge reaction, and I hated that, so it's a double win for me. The rule Chariot Runners might have existed before, but I haven't seen it. It allows chariots to move through units that have this rule without causing the unit any real problems. It's a definite plus for special unit types, and it's no real increase in the mental load for the person using them, as they're going to have planned for that before the battle even begun. I hope. There will be something for your opponents to think about as a little bit extra, but they're thinking about tactics and what you will do and what you don't, which is exactly what I think you should be doing during your opponent's turn, rather than just going off and making a cup of tea or something. So I think that's another big win. And then we have Close Order. And this is simply a reference to being able to adopt a standard formation. It's literally part of the basic rules and just a reference to them. So it literally adds 0 extra effort. It's just a win by default from the fact they even make sure you know what formation your unit can use. Next up is Countercharge, and this sounds like a really fun rule to me. It reminds me a little bit of the Space Wolf special reaction in Horus Heresy, and it allows some units to attempt to countercharge, whereby both units will count as charging in the following combat if it works. There'll be some additional mental load here, obviously, remembering you've even got that ability for starters. But I think as a general, you're going to be hoping someone charges your units so you can use their countercharge ability. And again, it's going to make your opponent think more carefully whilst you're doing stuff. I think that actually improves the engagement. Cumbersome is a rule which simply rules out standard shoot reactions. This used to be specified in some weapon profiles anyway. It's literally just about where you write this rule is all that's changed. There's nothing extra here. It's an auto win. The Detachment rule allows some units to attach to other units that have the Regiment rule, and this seems to me to work the same way that Skaven weapon teams used to. Again, it's just centralizing the rules. It's not adding extra complexity to the game. Dragged Along is a rule I've never seen before. It allows infantry to move some war engines around and drag it along with them. I guess maybe this is how they used to implement moving things like Dark Elf War Altars and things like that. I'm not absolutely certain, but it sounds like that's sort of a rule. Again, the planning for this is going to be before the game anyway, so there's nothing extra to think about. Drilled, I think, is an important addition to the way that they're actually dealing with maneuvering. It allows an automatic free redress of the ranks and to still march. This is going to be incredibly useful, especially with the way that open order and how many ranks versus rows of troops you have. It's going to be important because you're going to have to think about it whilst you're planning where you're going to go and what you're going to do. So there's more to think about, but it's thinking in a good way. You're not thinking about rules that you must remember. You're thinking about things your troops can do. By staying with a narrow unit in this game, you can actually march triple distance. A unit that has this rule could march their triple distance and then get into more of a fighting formation with a wider frontage and fewer ranks, but still get a double march the next turn, ready to receive an enemy's charge or something like that. It actually reminds me of reading about deployments in Bernard Cornwell novels and things like that, about how units are moving around the battlefield rather than just, oh, he's stuck in with the bayonet. It's thinking about how units get into position to be the most effective they can be. And so I think that's potentially an incredibly important rule. Ethereal is a rule that we've seen many times before. It's very similar to previous editions. Move through terrain and only be affected by magical attacks. It literally has always been part of the game as far as I'm aware, so it's an auto win. Evasive allows units to flee shooting attacks by falling back in good order. And remembering this option that is available to you certainly adds to your mental load, but once again, it increases the variety of units, it adds flexibility. I think it's a narrow win for whether we want this rule or not. Extra attacks plus X is literally just a rule we've had before. I'm assuming it's going to apply mainly to additional hand weapons and magic weapons. It's literally just a carry-on that's now called a special rule. The rule Fast Cavalry is based on Open Order, so I'll jump ahead a little bit and explain that. Open Order is a formation very similar to Close Order, but it allows you a free 90 degrees turn after movement unless the unit charged or marched or fled. Now, Open Order units aren't disrupted by moving through difficult or dangerous terrain, and they can still get a rank bonus and that triple march move. So it's in many ways very similar to Close Order. Now, if Fast Cavalry have this Open Order rule as well, it lets them make a quick turn even after marching. Now, these rules would have both been part of the larger maneuver and movement rules in previous editions. They are more complex than they've been in the past, but it allows different units to maneuver around the battlefield in different ways, exactly as you would expect if you were reading about an actual battle that involved infantry and cavalry and what they can each do differently. So I think it's actually making the rules clearer rather than murkier. Here works very similar to previous editions. I'm not even going to go through it. There's nothing to talk about. Feigned Flight allows a unit to flee combat but automatically rally straight away so they can act as normal in their next turn. This is, again, something you're going to have to actually remember you've got, and sometimes you're going to kick yourself when you forget it, so you could argue there's more mental load. But again, this is about giving units something extra and flavorful, and I think it's worth it. The rule Fight in Extra Rank is basically the rule that Spears used to have that allows another rank to fight. It's literally just moving the rule that we already had into this special rules section. Not sure if there was a Fire and Flee rule in previous editions, though I think there might have been. Basically, it's a bit like Feigned Flight. There's a small additional load here, but it's giving you extra options. The unit does a cross between a stand and shoot reaction and a flee reaction, except you have to roll 2d6 and take the lower of the two dice for how far you actually manage to go. The nice extra option. If you choose not to think about it, that's your loss, really, isn't it? First charge, I think, is a completely new rule, and it makes a unit's first charge of the game, makes their target unit become disrupted, which takes away their rank bonus. Now, that's hugely impactful on the game. It's going to be easy to forget in the rush of battle, but I think early in the game when you're planning your first moves and still thinking through your original battle plan, most people probably will remember it, and it certainly adds a lot to units to have it. I'm not actually sure, but the ability to do this does seem very limited. Looking at the Ravening Hordes book, not the Forces of Good, it's only available to heavy chariots and Chaos Knights. So I think the fact it's restricted is good, because otherwise there's lots of armies that would suffer too much with this rule, I think. Flaming attacks and flammable, I'll talk about them both at once. Flaming attacks causes fear in Warbeast and in swarms. It might actually be a really good thing to remember to take for people who are going to have loads and loads of snotlings. And eventually, if I have a Paint and Orcs and Goblin army, I've got enough snotlings for about 10 bases of the little sods. And I know that my friend Gary is looking potentially at snotlings to go with his Fimir in order to put them in his core selections. So flammable attacks might be really good for causing fear in them. And also, if something is flammable, then it can't use the regenerate rule against flaming attacks. I mean, that's again something we're used to. The rule Fly X is the same as previous editions, except that now it can have a variable value and different creatures can fly different distances. Sometimes there were different things that could fly different distances. Anyway, I think bats used to fly 12 instead of like 24 like most things. It's much easier to specify sensible fly distances now. It is more for people to remember, but you've got to remember your enemy's movement rates anyway of different things. So what does it matter if it's a flying move rate? Fine, no problem here. Frenzy is always a popular rule. Instead of giving you double attacks, it now gives you +1 attack. Back in my day, it used to turn Khorne units absolutely crazy. But it's, it's a rule that in some form has always existed. It used to fall under psychology rather than special rules. It no longer counts as psychology. But it does still affect psychology because units that have Frenzy no longer have to worry about fear, panic, or terror. Oh, unless, of course, they lose their Frenzy by losing a round of combat. And then, it's gone. And one last thing, units that are frenzied, you won't be surprised, have to make a charge if they're even vaguely possibly able to. They can't not declare a charge just because it's a bad idea. Furious Charge, which you might also want if you've got Frenzy, gives +1 attack on the charge as long as the charge was for more than 3 inches away. It's a rule that's needed in order to force some army types into a more attacking approach, I think. You want some armies to be aggressive and you want them to feel aggressive for you and your opponent. It adds a little bit of game design flavor, I think. So I think it's well worth it. Hatred is a rule that's been in GW core games for as long as I can remember. And I've been playing GW core games since the 1980s. 1989, admittedly, but I have been doing it. Now, it only applies in the first round of combat, which does reduce its effectiveness, and it certainly can't be accused of making the game overly complex compared to previous versions. How possibly could it? Tell me a version that didn't have it. I'm pretty sure Horde is a new rule, but, I haven't played every edition, especially the later ones. I had the books, but I didn't always play them. It actually allows you to exceed the normal rank bonus limitations by 1 for your particular unit type. It's how you'll still be able to get your +3 rank bonuses for goblins and ungors and things like that, and actually, feel like you've got a chance in combat. Howder simply codifies rules that I think we've had originally for lizardmen with the stegodons back in the day in 5th edition, I think it was. And I think now it goes to units like Arachnaroks and things like that as well. I think it's just moved that rule from specific army books into the main book. And, it allows 360 degrees of fire and things like that, and allows a crew to man a living thing in a way that turns it into something similar to sort of a pseudo chariot. It's quite a useful rule in some ways, obviously. Nothing extra from what we've ever experienced before, though. Ignores cover, does exactly what it says. Hard to really say anything about it. Immune to psychology, it's pretty clear. It's been in lots of previous editions. It now specifies that psychology is terror, fear, and panic. And also, I think this was how it was before. If you're immune to psychology, I've written here can choose to flee as a charge reaction, but I'm about 90% sure it's actually you can't choose to flee as a charge reaction. I think impact hits is mainly in the rules because it sounds so catchy. But once again, this is a rule as old as me playing GW games. Units now have to move at least 3 inches to get those impact hits, and they happen at step 10, initiative step 10, rather than before combat. But that makes some sort of sense to me. No problem with the complexity of that rule as far as I'm concerned. Impetuous is a new one to me. I think it might be a new edition. I'm not absolutely sure. It reads like a bloody faff, and I know that I'd forget about it, and I know it could utterly change games. In Ravening Hordes, it applies mainly to greenskin units, and it seems to have replaced the more frustrating rule Animosity, which Orcs and Goblins no longer have. Good news for greenskin players. I think it is an improvement on Animosity, at least, though. And the fact it's across much or all of the army will make it a lot easier to remember. You'll just go through your army at the start of every turn, checking if your army is being impetuous the way it used to be prone to Animosity. I can imagine it applying to Bretonnian Knights, though I've not seen the army book for them. I'll have to go and watch some battle reports to find out, but it would make sense, right? The one that bothers me, though, is that there's one Chaos unit has it too. That's Forsaken. I can easily imagine forgetting about this most of the time if I ever run any, because it's only going to be for one unit, and it's not going to be something I'm going to think about. I know I'm going to forget about it, and so that one to me is a little bit problematic. but still an improvement over the rule it replaced, in my opinion. Killing Blow is a boring rule, but we've seen it's like many times before, and it can occasionally result in a massive fun moment. Essentially, natural 6s to wound, prevent armor and regeneration rolls, and strip all remaining wounds. It's pretty much chopping something's head off or the equivalent. You're going to have to rely on ward saves to stop it. It's fine. We've seen it before. It's nothing new. We see it in lots of guises, in lots of GW games. It's just down to people to remember they've got the rule, and I think people normally will. Large targets is slightly different to how I remember it, in that it prevents models from getting a cover save, either partial or full, rather than adding +1 to actually hit them in the first place. And they can't be shielded by hiding behind a screen. To me, that seems better than previous versions. Looking at a bloody big model should remind you to think about the fact it's a large target and therefore it doesn't get cover saves. I think that's definitely a rule that we want in the game. Levies don't get any benefits from being near their general or near their army standard. On the plus side, they don't make other units make panic tests when they inevitably run away. I think that's a characterful rule. I would be surprised if we didn't see that mainly for Bretonnians and their serfs. I would be surprised if there wasn't a rule like that in previous editions. It's new to me, having not really, at least not remembering any battles against Bretonnians. Makes sense, seems fine. If a character has loner, it can't join a unit, and if a unit has loner, characters can't join it. I mean, that much makes sense. We've seen similar rules before, notably for me on Harpies, although it's weird that Harpies no longer have that rule. Still, it makes sense to include it in the rulebook. Things like Chaos Hounds now have it. Chaos Hounds in a Chaos Warriors list can take a handler as a champion, but that means that in your Beastmen list, your Chaos Hounds are going to fight as loners. I don't think it's the end of the world. I think it's an important rule for representing certain types of unit. Right, this video is getting a lot longer than I expected. So I'm going to cut it in half and put it up as part 1 and 2 so that you actually have a chance of getting each bit of it a bit quicker. There we go. Next bit to follow in a day or two.